get asked really frequently when I'm facilitating level ones and level twos and in other conversations, particularly from internal coaches or HR people, how do you implement coaching internally in organizations? And I have found myself over the last really 10 years saying over and over and over again, I've seen it done really well once. And when we were being asked about this open day, I wondered if it was an opportunity to, one, catch up with two people that I don't get to see anymore because we're all in lockdown, and two, introduce you firsthand to Joanne, Hansen and Nikki Roche, who ran the project in BAE Systems that I got to be a small part of. That I'm constantly referring back to because I feel like their story told by them and not told secondhand by me is going to have a lot of really useful learnings and insights for anybody who is working on creating coaching in a sustainable, changing way in the organizations that they're in. So I'm going to ask Joe and Nikki to introduce themselves, and as you do that, just talk about what was your role when you started this project. We're going to talk about how did you come to be here. So Joe, I'll start with you. Welcome.
Sure, thank you. Thanks for having me here. What a privilege. So I guess, the company that we're talking about was at BAE Systems here in Victoria. And, they've got a national presence. And I worked there for 10 and a half years. And it was, I guess, the final place that I worked as a pure HR practitioner, predominantly in the organisational development space. And my role there was really looking after a whole suite of organisational development activities. Of course, this whole piece around coaching fitted beautifully under there.
Thank you, Joe. And Nikki?
Did you leave me because I'm kind of like the larrikin like you, Charity? And
I wondered if
you wanted to get through Joey first. Yep. All right. Just as with Joe, privileged to be here. BAE Systems. Gee, it seems like a lifetime ago now, Joey. It was a while. And Charity, but my role there was I was working for Joe actually. So Joe was my boss. At the time, I joined coming from Navy actually. So I'd done 25 years with the Navy, and I think there's a few from Navy on this call actually, either currently or previously serving as well. So hi to you guys. And we'd done quite a bit of coaching and culture and all sorts of things like that in the Navy. And when I came across to BAE, I was thrilled that coaching was something that actually was not a foreign concept in the organisation. So coming in to work with Joe was just a delight because it meant that we were able to really talk sort of on a common level about what coaching is and about how we could use it within the organisation to really sort of get the results that we were looking for. So my role, I guess I was a leadership facilitator. So I'm not a HR specialist at all. In fact, my role in the Navy was driving ships, believe it or not. But I did specialise in leadership and coaching towards the back end of my career in the Navy, and then was lucky enough to transition across to BAE into a leadership facilitator role, and eventually sort of took on the lead coach role, working within the OD space there. So that was my role.
It was interesting for me watching Jane's presentation just now around how many of those things that are recently coming in you guys were doing in BAE. I mean, I think I started supervision in there 2013. So you were miles ahead of everybody else with the way that you were setting up internal coaching, the way you were supporting your internal coaches, the way you managed ethics was just well and truly beyond the game. So I'm very happy that everybody gets to hear your story. Where would you like to start, Joe and Nikki?
I feel a bit compelled always when we have this conversation to start by honouring the work that was done prior to us getting there. So I think it's great that we achieved some great things, and I mean, Charity, you often talk about how well we embedded the coaching culture, but that was a journey that had started well before Nikki and I. And I always like to honor the people that had the foresight to kick that journey off so long before us.
Awesome.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Joe. So it wasn't something that we had to, sort of start from scratch, I suppose. In fact, really what we achieved actually evolved from what had been set up originally, and we leveraged a lot of the leaders that were actually champions of that coaching, because coaching had actually kind of been already introduced by our predecessors, and it was really sort of us coming together and thinking about how we could have conversations across the business as the strategy was evolving, and it was evolving from, I guess, a much more siloed business unit approach into something that was a little bit more, oh gosh, how would you describe it, Joe? You know, what would you say? A little bit more, I guess, even, parallel, we moving
Collaborative.
collaborative. So really working with that evolving strategy to kind of embed coaching and use coaching as a support mechanism to align with that evolving strategy as well. So yeah, lots of conversations that we had around that.
Charity, can I jump in with a question?
Yeah.
Because you've obviously got some context because you were involved, and I'll give this question to Joe initially, seeing as you were there as the HR practitioner, and within IECL we deal with a lot of HR practitioners, and there'll be lots that will be on the call here. So what we've heard is the successful output of this program during your tenure, and the people that you took over from. But if I can ask you to reflect back to that particular time, Joe, and I'm asking you to be quite detailed here so that we can really hear what were the steps that you took. So when you came into it, what were the actual steps that you put into play in order to start this, building this internal coaching culture?
Yeah, so thank you, because what was existing there already was this strong delivery of internal leadership programs. And they were partnering with an external learning organisation, but delivering them internally with someone on the team. And they had attached coaching to that to close that knowing doing gap that we know that happens. So it was all about that return on investment. Okay, we're sending people on these leadership courses, but it's not impactful if they come back and then just continue doing what they were doing. So the coaching was already a critical part of getting that application of knowledge and cementing it on the job. So when I came into the organization, there was already this acceptance of coaching as a practice, and there was great internal anecdotal feedback that was being passed up to the management team about it. So what developed was this, I guess, paradigm in people's mind that learning and coaching, they go hand in hand, and it makes a difference here in this organization. So then organizations, I don't know of many organizations that aren't cost driven. So there comes a point at which you say, actually, we're already doing part of this capability internally. What if we took more of this internally? And so I think knowing the moment at which to have that conversation with the organization, where's the best place to position that conversation, and with who, and what else is going on? Jane talked about that, the whole system. So it's getting that timing right, and the timing just worked for us. And that we said, you know what, there's a few things coming together here. We could save money by bringing that capability in-house, but we've also got this growing HR capability internally that are looking for career development. And so coaching was something that we could offer them as a career development pathway. But again, with this whole paradigm of learning and coaching go together, Well, how do you maximize ROI? If we invest in HR, going off and getting coaching accreditations, that's useless to us if they're not coming back and actually applying it. And so it was just this step by step, you know, I make it sound like it happened in quick succession. It wasn't like that. It was just piece by piece. And so we ended up bringing all the leadership training in-house. We ended up building internal coaches and slowly transitioning that across. And then realizing that actually we need to make sure that this coaching capability is top notch, because the organization is familiar with what good coaching looks like. So we reached out to Charity and spoke to her about getting coaching supervision in-house. And so what you now had was HR people getting their coaching accreditations, practicing it on the job with our leaders. We're having more and more leaders start to ask for coaching because it's accessible. And we know that our coaches are continuing to develop their skills because they're having regular supervision. So I'll just stop there, Andy, because you know I'll go on and on.
No, that was a fantastic answer. I will sort of glide away from the role that Charity played, because you sort of painted her as came in there and made a significant difference. I'll let her talk about that in a few moments. Nikki, from your experience, coming from the Navy, coming in-house, coming into this role, and then working with Jo on this particular project, what was your a sort of early experience coming in? And and again, if I can ask you to sort of use as much detail as you're comfortable to do, to sort of sort of share with us your experience.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So coming into BAE, I was actually quite lucky, because I transitioned from Navy, and I actually had the opportunity to spend a year in Newcastle, which was where I was posted at the time. And BAE have a big aerospace footprint in Newcastle, so I was able to spend a year up there, which was fantastic, because it really gave me some good touch points with HR practitioners up there, and really allowed me to understand the landscape of what was going on in the aerospace industry, and to have some conversations with them about what their experience of leadership development and coaching had been. And I guess I realized at that point there that they were, sort of actually a little bit more evolved than what I was expecting or anticipating at that point. From there, I actually moved down to Melbourne and located at Williamstown with Jo at the dockyard there. And really, that's where we started to have some pretty in-depth conversations about the timing with regard to this coaching framework, and I guess what was a framework, essentially the coaching framework that we established. Jo had come from a different business unit as well. She'd spent time in weapon systems, and we also had another person in our team who had come from land as well. So we kind of had this exposure to a huge, sort of footprint across BAE and across all of Australia, and we all had different experiences of where they were at in terms of their capability, and also in terms of their appetite as well. And the ability for us to have that conversation really cemented what we thought we needed to do in terms of establishing that coaching framework, and then actually sort of transitioning that out to the business as a whole, and approaching the senior leaders to get on board with that as well. So I guess the experience that I had in developing that coaching framework was really about sort of having conversations with different parts of the organization, and identifying those champions that we were really going to be able to leverage as part of that coaching network. Interestingly enough, one of the things that I found I had to let go on or compromise on was the data and the analytics. So coming from Navy, big organization, stacks of resources and money, and a wonderful ability to actually be able to track, the impact that coaching is having on behavior, on the impact, that leadership is having on others. They'd rolled out, LSI 360s. There were tests and retests and retests and retests, and they were able to actually get data of those that had had coaching and had the retest and, the improvements, etc. from there. And there are PhDs and everyone involved. When I came across to BAE, I don't know if you remember, Joe, I was like, we've got to do culture surveys. We've got to get the data. We need the analytics. And I just got pushed back. Joe and Gay at the time were like, Nick, it's just not going to happen. We're not going to get the data. But what we've got is this really strong narrative that's been established over a long period of time. And we know that we've got the support of the senior leaders and, the champions across the business as well. So I kind of had to go through a process of letting that go and really focusing on the anecdotal side, on the narrative, and really on that professional development side. So I kind of had to transition into putting my HR hat on and, kind of really listening to what the business needed versus what I thought it needed. So that was kind of, what I had to compromise on there.
If I can jump in, there's a couple of questions that are coming through, but one of them links really nicely into your data and analytical space. And there's a question from Kat which asks, how did you quantify the ROI? So I'm interested to hear, answer that question. So how did you quantify it? But if you were able, if Joe said, have all the data and analytics that you want, because we often get asked, how do you quantify the ROI? So how did you do it? But if you were to do it again now, how would you like to do it?
Joe, do you want to speak to that one? Because we actually did kind of bring in some analytics after that, as we thought about how we might, put some ROI around it.
Yeah, it's funny because I distinctly remember a moment in time, because there's always this sense of how do we stay a step ahead of where we think the business needs to go to next. And sometimes we were several steps ahead. Nikki and I would have conversations about, we really want to do that, but the business is just not ready for it. And funnily, analytics, believe it or not, was one of those things. I kept thinking, right, they're going to ask for this. It's one of the first things that gets cut. Don't want it to go. How do we set ourselves up? The management board gave us a direct message. We are not interested. We get enough anecdotal feedback that tells us the value of this practice, which I know is a bit shocking. It still feels a bit shocking to me. Although when I stop and think about it, I know how I pick a restaurant, or I know how I get a referral to someone I really want to work with. It's all anecdotal. I don't ask for stats on it. So it really probably shouldn't be that shocking that anecdotal feedback from the business was so powerful. However, what we did do was quite a bit of measurement on our leadership programs that a lot of coaching was attached to. And one of the things we did at a point was even, I don't even know if they still run it, but the Corporate Executive Board, or CEB at the time, actually had quite an in-depth survey where it would ask participants for their perceived progress and some measures, and also the managers, both at the start and the end. And we got quite a lot of detailed analysis out of that. And we also did, your usual coaching impact surveys at the end of the coaching. So we had that there. Part of our leadership programs also involved doing the LSI, the Lifestyles Inventory, that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And so we'd often compare the retests of those and look at what was happening on a composite level. So we had some data certainly there. But to be truthful, the management board was not asking for it. It was more just good practice on our part, that it was a way of us also checking how that was going. Nikki, I'm not sure, there might be something more that you might want to add to that. And you're on mute.
Yeah, no, I think you covered it there, Joe. And I think, part of that was as well was that we just started getting huge demand across the business to actually want to get coaching accreditation. So, as Joe said, it started with HR and, an opportunity for HR to have a development program that was going to help them. But what we found was that it really started expanding across the business, and we were finding a lot of project managers, a lot in operations, a lot, just people that were outside of HR and OD that, just were really seeing the benefit of the coaching practice in the leadership programs, and also coming out of, I guess the coaching framework and practitioners that we had, and just really wanted to get on board with it. They were really, they found that they had a passion for it as well. And, Charity would attest that, at some points in our coaching supervision sessions, we'd have 20 people in there, and there'd be like, 3 from HR and the rest would be across the business. And we'd spend, a couple of hours talking about some of these really interesting challenges that people were experiencing, and were coaching through. So I think that was probably another analytic, I suppose, that we could have looked at in terms of the amount of demand that was created as a result of the coaching framework and the reputation.
Thank you. Charity, I've got one more question, and then I'll bring your voice back into it if you'd like to do so. I'm going to take part of a question that's come from Lauren and Nikki or Joe. Either or, you can choose to answer this, but it sort of links back into your answer there, where you said that sometimes you had 20 people attending the coach supervision sessions, and there were some HR, but some from across the business. How did you manage? How did you manage your workload, assuming that you were both coaching as well? But how did the other internal coaches manage their workload between their actual coaching and then the other aspects of their particular role?
So a couple of things. If you went and were accredited as a coach, there was an expectation that you would do some formal coaching in the organization as well as informal coaching. And so the supervision sessions were a way of making sure that people were keeping those skills up to date, but we also were tracking what formal relationships were they given in the organization. So it was a commitment that they made up front. It's kind of a trade-off. Yes, I want this development, but the trade-off is I have to find a way to make some formal commitment to it in the workplace. The other thing was that if I think about HR business partnerships and how it was structured in the BAE Systems business, a lot of the relationships and conversations that we're having were perfect opportunities for a coaching conversation, not your formal one, but you could certainly easily apply sort of a grow backbone to those conversations. So even when we came back into the supervision sessions, we'd supervise on those, what informal coaching opportunities have you got, and are you making the most of?
Thank you, Joe. I'll pause there because I could keep going, but I want to give Charity the opportunity to jump in because she can ask questions from her perspective of being the supervisor in the program, but now her perspective from sitting from the IECL side as well. So Charity, what questions do you have for Nikki?
Yeah, for both of you, one of the things when we were preparing for this session and got to hang out a little bit that I hadn't heard before or hadn't heard explicitly before that I thought is worth mentioning is how much this coaching strategy, you alluded to it, Joe, but how much it wasn't a coaching strategy. It was a listening strategy. You were really paying attention to what is the business strategy, what is the organizational strategy, and where are the gaps? What are the leaders going to need? And coaching was the answer to that. And I feel like that was such a shift in the way that, many people say, how can we implement coaching? It's like, well, you've got to listen for where it's going to be useful. So I'm wondering if you could talk about how you were following the strategy and trying to be a step ahead of the skills that the leaders needed at the same time.
Yeah, I was pretty forceful with you on that, wasn't I? Terry said to me, you know, what if people want to know how to do a coaching culture? And I said, that's never what we set out to do. It was not even language that we used. And it certainly wasn't an intent of, hey, let's build this coaching empire. And I mean, we loved coaching, don't get me wrong. But it was never the intent of how can we get more. It was always in service of the business and what their leaders needed in terms of delivering the strategy now, the strategy in 3 years, the strategy in 5 years. So it was always about, what does the business need? And to be honest, you could probably put a grow backbone down that, you know, sort of thinking. It wasn't our goal. It was, what's their goal? What's the outcome that they're seeking? And how do we remain a few steps ahead of that? And there's lots of different paths that we could have gone down. But I guess the next step is you think about their reality. What are they familiar with? What is something that's not too big a step for them to take? And they were already familiar with coaching. They enjoyed it. It was having impact. Right. Can we do more of that? Will that take them in the right direction for what they're looking for? So it was always with that as a view. And it was about keeping pace with where they were at. And like I said, I remember almost pulling Nikki, you know, down from the roof with the ideas. You know, Nikki's incredibly innovative. She used to come in, Joe, I've got this a great idea. But it was always like, right, because a lot of our team was out running leadership programs across the business and so deeply across the business, they were having conversations all the time. So they always knew, where's the business at? What are they ready for? What are their most pressing problems? What are they ready to listen to? What do they need? So we always knew, what's the pace that we can go at?
It was very much about pace as well, and about being agile to that pace. At different times throughout the implementation of the strategy and the rollout of the strategy, what we would find is that there were different areas that actually needed more coaching than others. So, you know, it might have been that aerospace was growing at a point, and, you know, really found that the coaching was really relevant and useful and helpful for them at that particular moment in time. You know, Joe and I were at Williamstown when maritime really shrunk and lost about 1,800 people. And look, it wasn't the time and place to have the conversations with them at that point about the coaching. So we kind of, you know, sort of, I guess, ebbed and flowed with where the need within the business was at that particular time. And I think I saw over, you know, there was a question over there in the about the operational rhythm for regular coaching interactions. And that was really kind of about listening to the needs of the organisation and being in service to the organisation. So if you know, if maritime needed something at a particular moment in time, then we would have, you know, sort of our cohort of coaches available, and we knew how much capacity each of those coaches had, and what their you know, what their, I guess, their capabilities were, and how to match those with what the need of the organisation was at the time. So it was really very much about us listening to, you know, what people needed, and then responding to that in the most effective way that we could. So it wasn't kind of, all right, you know, you're going to have 10 coaching sessions at this point for, you know, sort of for 6 sessions, and you guys over here. It really was sort of an evolving, adaptive strategy, I think. And, you know, we had a chat just before coming here, and, you know, I think BAE are not in the space where we left them, Joe, which was, you know, sort of 4 or 5 years ago now. And, you know, they've adapted to what they need at this moment in time, and no doubt, you know, that will kind of ebb and flow as well. So it really was about us being flexible and adaptable.
If I can jump in and change tack slightly, because it was obviously a very successful program, but I'm making the assumptions there were some challenges that you all faced, and there were some bumps in the road as you went through. So I'd love to hear, if you reflect back on it, what were some of the challenges that you had to negotiate as you were building this program through.
I think one of the bumps was that some HR practitioners would go do the program with best of intentions of doing some formal coaching load, and it would look like they would try and wriggle out of it when they were given, an opportunity to do a formal engagement. So, there were some pretty straightforward conversations that were had at that time. We had all the usual things happen that you get with any coachee. Even as a leader in the organization, they'd sign up for coaching and then be a repeated no-show, or, show up and not be willing to engage. So, we had all the usual challenges that you would get as a coach. And I think one of the other things that we recognized fairly early on is that it couldn't be an entirely internal coaching network. So we still actually had external coaching networks, IECL as well as some others. So we had this external panel because there were some scenarios that we would refer externally. And, the management team, the very top management team might be some of those people that we'd refer externally. Nikki, I'm sure you can think of some other road bumps that we faced along the way.
Well, the management team did not have an appetite for internal coaches, which was, that was kind of a pretty much a non-negotiable with them. So we really had to have that external coaching panel available for them to choose to be coached if they wanted to. And as Joe said, that was sort of similar across the business as well. Some other road bumps that we came up against. There were times when there was a press for some data, particularly when there was a change in the management board. So if we'd have some and at one point I think it almost changed by half. So there was an initial push for some data to present to actually justify the coaching program, and certainly any sort of culture measurement or anything like that to go alongside it. But again, it was about kind of having the conversations at the right time to be able to sort of I guess get past that and just continue the rollout of the coaching. So I probably not much more than you've said there, Joe.
I think the other road bump that happened is, once the internal capability got built up and it became quite well known that this was something that we were offering, we had to be really explicit. So Nikki would be, at the computer punching out like really clear coaching frameworks. What is coaching? What is not coaching? Because when there's an internal resource at your disposal, suddenly everyone wanted coaching and it wasn't always entirely appropriate. So it was kind of like, oh, too far, everyone, like reel it back. Let's be super clear about what is coaching and what it's not, where it's appropriate and where it's not.
We did have a mentoring framework alongside the coaching as well. So, and that was again, something that was done within OD. So we had visibility across and transparency of both of those. And sometimes it was about, sort of having the conversation to suggest that perhaps mentoring might be the better option for people at particular moments in time.
Thank you. Charity, I'm going to shut up and let you come back in.
I've just got a question from John Raymond here that says, from your perspective, Joe and Nikki, is there a critical mass that needs to be met for coaching to work in organisations or achieve the organisational aims from where you sit?
We started, I reckon, Joe, with about 5 or 6, and that was mainly OD and HR, and completely, it was unsustainable because we were just really really pushed to the limit with the number of coaches that we had. I think by the time I'd left, we were up to around about 30 coaches. And that seemed to be, and the organisation was at about, we're at about 4,000, I think then, Joe, 4 or 5,000. And that seemed to be able to meet the demand. There were some that were picking up a lot more than that, and others that were only picking up one, sort of every 3 to 6 months. But that was not sure if there's an actual number or a percentage that worked, but that seemed to be sort of a number that seemed to work okay. What are your thoughts, Joe?
Charity, can you ask that question again?
I can. It is, hold on.
I can ask the question directly.
Yeah,
Oh,
why
go
don't you
on,
ask the
John.
question, John?
Sorry, I just didn't want to cut in, but I'm cutting in anyway. So look, the question was, if you wanted to kind of, for coaching to work, it was less about the number, although that capacity issue is important, but more about a kind of a cultural tipping point. Obviously the inertia to break, to start it is huge effort. But then is there and I don't know what the measure might be, but is there a point when coaching becomes part of the culture and it brings a life of its own, rather than something that you've got to continually kind of push, is the question. Because I just think there's a number of organizations that are in similar situations where they've been investing in coaching for a long time, Navy being one of them, and just wondering whether there's a tipping point where now it becomes a norm.
Yeah, there is. And I guess what I'm doing a rapid search on is I have this feeling, so I'll just speak to the feeling that I've got, is it's not around, a critical mass in the organization that are in favor of it. It felt like it was just more the narrative that Nikki spoke about. So it was just the way we talk about coaching around here, the way we experience coaching around here. So it was just that there was enough influencers, key influencers in the business that spoke about it in such a way to the people with the money and the power and all of those sorts of things that really gave that narrative life. So there is a tipping point, and I think it's listening for that. And it's that piece around, what are they familiar with? What have they got a leaning towards? Right, now can I take them that next step? It's probably like when you're in a coaching relationship and you're writing that boundary with them, and then you're like, right, I can push them that bit further. But could I put my finger on and say what exactly contributes to that tipping point? I'm not sure that I could, and I suspect it might vary in different organizations, but it was definitely something around the narrative for us in BAE.
It's interesting as well. I'll just build on that a little bit, because it's when you say the word coaching, it's what you notice in the reaction of others, right? So when you're having that conversation, and you talk about coaching, and there's just not a flinch. There's just it's just a continued conversation. And the antithesis for that, for us in BAE, was using the word culture. Culture was almost like a dirty word. So as soon as we started to talk about measuring culture, there was just this, we can't go there. That's just too scary. That's too much. So we just knew that it wasn't the right time for us to be working in that space or to be measuring culture, et cetera, et cetera. And I think Navy's quite different, because Navy kind of did it the other way. They kind of looked at, had this really, amazing culture rollout, and culture measurement became, sort of a really common thing for them. There was no threat associated with that anymore, but there was perceived threat around that in BAE. But with coaching, it was reward state straight up. There was no pushback, and that was the trigger where you knew, oh, I can have some good conversations around this.
I'd add that the way that both of you and the team that you worked with, those that came before and afterwards, helped create that, though, was the way that you spoke about it, not like people who had discovered the answer and here's this thing and we're in love with it and you should all try it, which is how some of us get about coaching sometimes. But just you were living it. You took it really seriously internally. It's one of the things that I noticed that still stands out when I think about this work that you created, was that you spoke about your internal coaching roles and responsibilities as seriously as the external coaching. You took everyone was doing level 1s and 2s. It wasn't even in-house training or little bits. It was serious. If we're going to use this for our internal coaching, we're going to properly train people and we're going to get them the accreditation. They're going to commit to a certain amount of hours of coaching, but you made them commit to supervision too. Like it wasn't a small time sacrifice people had to make. But the way that you professionalized it, there's some questions in here around how do you, if people don't only want external coaches. And I would say that the way that you treated internal coaches, the barriers to entry, Nikki, around, and afterwards, I've never seen an internal organization match the way you did. You took matching internally as seriously as you took matching externally. And so people started to really understand, I think, that it was in service of them. It wasn't like a new thing that you'd worked out that HR was doing to the organization. It was. I think how you spoke about it.
I wanted to. We've got 9 minutes left, and I could quite easily carry on this discussion. I've got one final question, Charity, and then I'll leave it for you if that's all right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to loop in because there's been some great questions coming through, and I simply can't get to all of them. And then Mr. Raymond has already jumped in and started to take up some of the time. So let's keep him with his camera off. If I connect with lots of the other themes that have come through, there's been people asking questions around how did you link it into, or did you link it into people's KPIs? Yeah, with coaching being having such a impact, but it's often only offered to a certain part of the business. Did you scale? How did you scale? There's lots of other wonderful questions there, but I'm going to wrap it all up. What advice would you give? Because it sounds like you guys were quite ahead of the curve in that particular time. So for the people listening now, thinking, okay, well, I want to do this in my organisation. What would be your top two pieces of advice that they can take away? And Nikki, you're on screen right now, so I'm going to come to you first, which means, Joe, you can think of something different to what Nikki said.
Okay. Probably don't do it to the organisation. Do it with them. Have the conversations with them and understand what their needs are. Get rid of your ego, I guess, and just listen. So do it with them, not to them. That would probably be my advice.
Thank you, Nikki. And Joe, from your perspective?
I know you said something different, but I cannot reiterate that enough. It's shift your agenda out of the way. And what does the business need? What's the problem that they're trying to solve? And then think about, where are my small pockets of opportunity? And look for those tiny pockets, because tiny pockets end up joining with more tiny pockets and more. And before you know it, you've actually built momentum. But I would really say, move your agenda out of the way. And what's the problem the business is trying to solve? And you may have to accept that coaching is not the answer yet.
Thank you.
That's when we were preparing for this, that I was listening to you and Nikki talk about that. It was the first time it occurred to me that I think now, looking back at it, the reason that you were able to achieve what you achieved is that you were applying a coaching approach to coaching. You were listening and asking, all right, what's your goal? What's your reality? Is that exactly as you said before? It wasn't a tell, it was an ask. And the organisation responded really well to it. And for an organisation like BAE that was pretty hierarchical, I mean, we used to have meetings in the bunker, and the pockets, like you say, Joe, of people that just fell in love with it when they found it, and the energy that they spread in that, of the people that they worked with, and the way it built was just, it was beautiful to watch.
Yeah, and I think, Charity, it's something that's sitting on my mind that we haven't spoken explicitly about. But of course, what happens is that you get all these people role modeling coaching. So you've got all these internal people coaching people, and in doing so, they're role modeling it. But they don't stop being coaches the minute they walk out of that coaching session. They're still sort of floating around the organization, role modeling what good coaching conversations look like. So you've got that at work as well.
Yeah.
The non-negotiable is the supervision as well, because that is one of the biggest learning places for these new evolving coaches, and I was one of them as well. We've all been one of them, right? But going into those sessions and actually deconstructing your coaching sessions and being coached by others around that is like, we started out and it was quite clunky, because people were like, what? No, this is not what I was expecting. This is just supposed to be, Charity telling us some cool things to do. But really being held to account around those coaching sessions, and really stripping it back and thinking about, what did you do well? What did that response mean to you? What did you notice from that? That's where the learning really happened. And that's where people kind of really fell in love with it. They were like, oh, wow. Oh, that's what, okay, I get this now. And then they go back out and they just do it better and better and better. And when you're doing something really well, it has an impact. That's how you gain, sort of the, I guess the momentum around this. You're just doing it well.
I've never seen an organisation get so much return on investment from level 1s and level 2s as an organisation that mandates that if you do them, you need to coach and you need to come to supervision and reflect on your coaching and talk about where it's working and where it's not working. The skill uplift in the people that, the HR people that would come to those supervision sessions in the bunker, over a short amount of time, because they were practicing and reflecting on their practice like professional coaches would, was astounding. They were ready for level 2 faster. They were ready for level 3 faster. The capability of the coaches in BAE was something that I'd never seen before. And it was mostly due to the way that it was set up around, we'll give you this training. It's world-class training. And to make anything of it, you're going to have to actually use it. It was so well done. And that's really what I wanted to share with everybody, is how the insight that the two of you brought, and those before and after you brought, to how that was set up and the impact of that insight.
The only problem is you coached us all out of the organisation, Charity. So
we're
all out coaching on our own now, right?
Well, it's worked out well for IECL because you're all associates with us. So I feel like that's a net benefit. I was going to say, when Andy asked what was one of the challenges, it was like, you had restructures about every 3 months for a while there. Was the consistency of coaches. You just get this really strong bench strength with these good coaches, and then everyone would go. But that's part of the game too.
Charity, Andy, thank you very much for hosting that session. Jo, Nikki, wonderful to have your insights and to share your experiences. Thank you again. I know that things that I took away from that was, that doing it with the organisation, coaching to be in service of the business. I love the fact that, Jo, you said it several times through the session, that idea of listening, one of those core skills for coaching. And I hear you really listening with some very big ears and looking for those little pockets of opportunity, being 2 or 3 steps ahead of the business, thinking about that in advance. And just hearing how the work that you all did there, impacted and created coaches, it created better leaders, it bridged that knowing doing gap, it impacted ROI, and it impacted obviously the organisation more broadly. So thank you again, fantastic session. We're very aware we didn't get to all of the questions in the chat. I think best efforts there, Andy. But again, I remind everybody, if you've got some burning questions that you want to pose back to any of the panel or any of the IECL faculty, please feel welcome to post them back to us, and we will certainly seek to follow up or pass your questions on.